Contract killer Frank Gusenberg sustained 14 bullet wounds on February 14, 1929. In the SMC Cartage Warehouse at 2122 North Clark Street in Chicago. The police arrived. It was as if his innocent childhood was calling him back. One of the police in the scene was Sergeant Clarence Sweeney, a man who was once his childhood friend in the same neighborhood that he and his brothers Peter and Henry grew up on. "Frank, your brother's dead," Sweeney asked Gusenberg, who was on the brink of death. "Who done it?" "No one done it," said Gusenberg, true to the code and the gangland principle of omerta, or absolute silence. "No one shot me," he continued.
"Nobody shot me."
Sweeney kept on asking even as Gusenberg was taken to the Alexian Brothers Hospital. Again, he said, "I ain't no copper." Those were reportedly his last words. Gusenberg died 3 hours later after being shot. He was the last victim to die in one of the most notorious gangland slayings in America, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, a gruesome crime that has mysteriously put nobody in jail. "70 rounds of bullets were said to have been shot at 10:30 a.m. on that fateful Valentine morning. A truckload of bootlegged whiskey at a bargain price was supposed to be delivered in the SMC Cartage Warehouse, but 4 men infiltrated the scene. 2 of them were camouflaged as police officers and a fake raid might have been announced. The other 2 were dressed in the classic suits, ties, overcoats, and hats. 7 men were lined up against a whitewashed wall, under a single dangling white light bulb, the bricks being the last thing they saw. They thought it was a routine police raid, so they allowed themselves to be disarmed. But then 2 12-gauge shotguns and 2 Thompson submachine guns, nicknamed as Tommy guns or Chicago typewriters, gunned them all down. Alas, those men did not have a rendezvous in that garage for some discreet gay Valentine meetup. The racket of bullets aroused the witnesses. Pretending to be the police, the 2 men in uniform held the other 2 at gunpoint as they escorted them in a black Cadillac sedan, equipped with a siren, a gong, and a rifle rack, looking exactly like the kind the police used. The massacre was allegedly the watershed moment between mob bosses Scarface Al Capone, co-founder and boss of the Chicago outfit, and his rival George Bugs Moran, head of the North Side Gang. Besides contract killers Frank and Peter "Goosey" Gusenberg, 3 of the other victims were also members of the North Side Gang. They were Moran's second-in-command and brother-in-law, a convicted armed robber and a reputed killer, Albert Kachelik, alias James Clark, the gang's bookkeeper and business manager, an accountant and embezzler, Adam Hayer, a nightclub owner and a newly appointed official of the Central Cleaners and Dyers Association, Albert Weinshank. The 2 other collaborators were former optician turned gambler and gang associate who wanted to brag to his friends about his mob connections, Reinhard H. Schwimmer, and occasional mechanic for the gang, John May, the only one not in suits nor in police uniform, wearing instead a greasy brown coveralls. Alongside May was his dog, Highball. Unfortunately, the dog was not able to give a witness testimony due to a language barrier. Capone's prize, George Bugs Moran, was not among those who were murdered. He was running late. He and fellow gang member Ted Newberry reached the warehouse and saw the 4 perpetrators. He thought it was a police raid, so they slipped away and went to a nearby coffee shop. He signaled to another gang member, Henry Gusenberg, the younger brother of Frank and Peter, who then turned back. Another member, Willie Marks, also spotted the police car. He recorded the license number before escaping the neighborhood. The roaring 1920s ushered the rise of mob crime in Chicago. Influenced by the temperance movement that sought to limit alcohol consumption, The US Senate just approved the 18th Amendment on January 16, 1919, ratifying it as part of the Constitution. It prohibited alcohol, and a year later, the whole country went dry, commencing the Prohibition era that would last from 1920 to 1933. The sale and transport of intoxicating liquors like wine and beer were banned. The sale of bootleg liquor rose, fueling lucrative opportunities for crime syndicates like the North Side Gang and the Chicago Outfit. The SMC Garage, the scene of the crime, was rented for the illegal traffic of booze. It seemed that alcohol was so important that people would kill to have it. The streets were filled with blood and alcohol. Moran succeeded his aggressive predecessors. Former Polish American leader of the North Side Gang, Earl J. Jaime Weiss, who was killed by the Chicago Outfit. Co-leader Vincent the Schemer Jucci, who was killed by arresting officer Detective Dan Healy, and leader Charles Dean O'Banion, better known as Dion O'Banion, who was killed by Chicago Outfit hitmen John Scalise and Albert Anselmi, and Frankie Yale, a close friend and second employer of Al Capone. Violence always ran amok amongst crime syndicates, but certain events probably contributed to the planned assassination of Moran. The North Side Gang had been connected to the murders of Antonio the Scourge Lombardo on September 7, 1928, and Pascalino Patsy Lolordo on January 8, 1929. They were presidents of the Union Siciliana and close associates of Scarface. Patsy's murder had been purported as a prelude to a planned assassination of Capone. Naturally, Al Capone had been widely assumed to be the main perpetrator for ordering the massacre. But he was happily vacationing at his retreat in Palm Island, Florida during the crime. Only a few believed him, though. He didn't need to be the one to pull the trigger anyway. But Moran still had a lot of other enemies. Perhaps the assassins actually came for the others, hence why he wasn't killed. Perhaps those supposed police officers in disguise were really policemen, as Frank Gusenberg actually alleged. Perhaps the massacre was a retaliation from the Purple Gang or the Sugar House Gang, another criminal mob participating in the bootlegging trade, for a recent hijacking of their whiskey. Perhaps it had something to do with a fight for control of the dry cleaning rackets, of which Albert Weinshank, one of the victims, was a central figure. The police even considered Moran as a suspect at one point, perhaps out of the members' insubordination. The police returned to the Gusenberg's accusation that a police officer had something to do with it. The North Side Gang had stolen a truckload of liquor from a crooked cop who might have retaliated. The investigation's crosshairs returned to the Purple Gang, whose members had good business relations with Scarface. 3 men rented rooms in houses directly across the SMC garage, 10 days before the crime. The police presented mugshots to landladies Mrs. Duty and Mrs. Orvidson, along with other landladies. These were of the Purple Gang members George Lewis, Eddie Fletcher, Phil Keywell, and his younger brother Harry. All of them were questioned and cleared. The police also eyed Capone hitmen John Scalise and Albert Anselmi, and bodyguard Frank Rio. They were also searching for Jack Machine Gun McGurn, Capone's top executioner. Whenever multiple shots were fired at a crime scene, the police put the machine gun as one of their possible suspects. Scalise, Anselmi, and McGurn were charged, but Jack was cocky. He had what was called the blonde alibi. He was with his blonde girlfriend Louise Rolfe across state lines. He said that he believed it was the cops. The other 2 were released as well due to lack of evidence. Capone had Scalise murdered just 3 months after the massacre. But another key piece of evidence came out 8 days after Valentine's Day. On February 22, a 1927 Cadillac sedan, disassembled and partially burnt, was found in a garage fire on Wood Street. This was the car used by the murderers. The engine number was traced back to a Michigan Avenue dealer who sold the car to a certain James Morton in Los Angeles. The burnt garage had been rented by a certain Frank Rogers, who gave his address as 1859 West North Avenue. It led to the Circus Cafe, an establishment operated by Claude Maddox, born John Edward Moore, the head of the Circus Cafe gang and a member of a gang called Egan's Rats. The man had ties with the Chicago outfit and the Purple Gang. The police did not find anything about this James Morton and Frank Rogers. It could be safe to say that these were just invented names. A witness then came out with a testimony. A truck driver named Elmer Lewis claimed to have sideswiped a police car a block away from 2122 North Clark Street, just minutes before the murders. The driver just shooed him away. He was missing a front tooth, Elmer remembered. Board of Education President H. Wallace Caldwell said to have witnessed the sideswiping and claimed to not have seen any front tooth either. The police were confident that this was none other than the toothless Fred Killer Burke, a former member of Egan's Rats. Burke and his friend James Ray were infamous for dressing in police uniforms during their robbery sprees. Sadly for the police, Fred was in hiding as a fugitive. But on December 14, 1929, a drunken Burke rear-ended another vehicle of a man named Forrest Cool and just ran off. Patrolman Charles Skelly pursued him, but the killer shot him 3 times to death. Burke sped away but crashed. He was nowhere to be found afterward. The vehicle driven by Fred Burke was registered under the alias Frederick Dane. It was confirmed that Dane was indeed Burke. Police raided his bungalow in St. Joseph, Michigan. A large trunk with a bulletproof vest, almost $320,000 US in bonds freshly stolen from a Wisconsin bank, 2 Tommy guns, pistols, 2 shotguns, and a bunch of ammunition was found in the bungalow. Forensic ballistics led by forensic scientist Calvin Goddard identified the weapons as the guns used in the massacre. It was also used in the 1928 murder of Frankie Yale. Burke was caught a year later under the alias Richard F. White and was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Skelly. His answers about the massacre were never made public for some odd reason. He was never charged for that crime. He died of a heart attack in prison in 1940, buried under the alias Thomas Camp. Some suggested that the feds wanted to pin the massacre on Capone himself. Another lead comes into the scene on January 8, 1935. The FBI raided a Chicago apartment building at 3920 North Pine Grove in search of the remaining members of the Barker Karpis gang, one of the most notorious and longest-lived criminal gangs during the Depression era, led by Fred Barker, Arthur Doc Barker, and Alvin Francis Creepy Karpis. Shots were fired. Bank robber Russell Gibson died in the encounter. One of the people taken in custody was another bank robber named Byron Bolton, an associate of Egan's Rats. He had acted as the valet of Chicago outfit hitman Fred Getz, also known as Shotgun George Ziegler. Bolton claimed that he was one of the culprits in the St. Valentine's Day massacre, together with Getz and Burke among several others. Bolton's revelations were kept secret due to some quirk about the FBI not having jurisdiction in a state murder case. But muddled versions went out in the media, in particular to the Chicago American newspaper, where they declared the crime as solved, even though the FBI and its first director, J. Edgar Hoover, washed their hands of the case. According to the reports, Bolton asserted that among the people plotting for Moran's assassination were Getz, Burke, and Al Capone, among others. He was in charge, together with a certain Jimmy Moran, to watch the SMC Cartage Warehouse and signal the killers at the Circus Cafe once Bugs Moran arrives. The killers, according to him, were Burke, Getz, Maddox, Gus Winkler, an associate of Capone, head of a Prohibition-era criminal gang specializing in armed robbery and murder for hire, Robert Bob Carey, an armed robber, contract killer, and a member of the Egan's Rats, and Raymond Craneneck Nugent, a Capone hitman. There weren't 4 men, there were 4 shooters and 2 getaway drivers. Bolton said that all of them were in plainclothes. Nobody was in a police uniform. Days after the massacre, a Peerless Motor Company sedan was found near a house owned by Maddox. The address book of Albert Weinshank, one of the victims, was said to have been found in one of its pockets. The probable reason that the perpetrators missed their target was that Bolton mistook one of the men as Moran himself, most likely Weinshank. They were surprised to find 7 men, but they simply killed them all. Bolton said that Capone was so furious for this mistake that the Chicago outfit boss threatened to execute him. But Getz dissuaded him, and Bolton's life was spared. Georgette Winkler, Gus Winkler's widow, and William Drury, a Chicago detective, corroborated Bolton's claims. Georgette said that Capone trusted her husband and his friends for the kind of operations such as the Massacre, calling their crew the American Boys. Alvin Creepy Karpis, one of the leaders of the Barker Karpis gang, the only one taken alive by the FBI out of the 6 criminals ever given the title of Public Enemy Number 1, said that he heard from Nugent about the massacre. He also claimed that Capone told him firsthand that Getz planned the massacre. Despite these revealing statements, the FBI did not make a move. With the exception of Burke and Maddox, all of the men mentioned were dead by 1935. But the whole thing still posed a lot of questions. Why did the assassination plot require a hit squad when one assassin could have sufficed? Why didn't they try again and make sure that Moran was dead? And why was the testimony not used against Capone? But the confession caught a Chicago citizen's attention. On January 28, 1935, Frank T. Farrell wrote a letter to J. Edgar Hoover about information that could be useful to the investigation. Information that could possibly uncover the mystery of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. A former firefighter named William DeVerne Jr., who was the son of a Chicago police sergeant, was shot in the stomach during a bar fight in the C&O restaurant at 509 North Clark Street back in November 1928. This place was a popular gangster hangout. He was left for dead in the corner of Rush Street and Austin Avenue. He managed to crawl to a fire station call box to call for help. He wouldn't dare name any names to the police. But he did tell his cousin, William Three-Finger Jack White. He named several members of Bugs Moran's gang, including one of the Gusenberg brothers. These were the men who shot him. DeVerne died a month later. White was still seeking vengeance. Three-Finger Jack contacted one of the Gusenberg brothers who was involved in the murder, asking for their assistance for his plan in holding up a factory for its payroll. He might have known the brothers. He was said to have worked with them in a 1926 robbery. One of the men involved in that crime ratted to the cops. In his plot to whack this rat, White arranged for 2 men to disguise as police officers and murder the rat in his sleep. He believed that the uniforms could gain their trust and drop their defenses. White was in cahoots with crooked cops. It is possible that he had help with Sergeant William J. DeVerne of the Chicago Police Department, the father of the man killed by the North Side Gang. It might have been revenge then. The gravity of the emotions involved could perhaps explain the fury of the bullets littered on the bodies of the victims. And the investigation didn't go anywhere. Perhaps because a certain sergeant had something to do with it. If ever Capone really had something to do with it, he kind of won in the end anyway. Moran completely lost control of the territory he once ruled after the massacre. Moran had said about the massacre, "Only Capone kills like that," while Capone sarcastically replied, "The only man who kills like that is Bugs Moran." The SMC Cartage Warehouse was torn down in 1967. A Vancouver businessman named George Patty bought the 414 bricks of the wall in which the victims were shot. The holes of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre were still present. Each brick was lettered and numbered. Over the next 42 years, the bricks became a part of a traveling exhibit, housed in the Crime Museum, and displayed in the men's restroom of a nightclub. Many of them later sold to individuals. In 2012, the rest were transferred to the Mob Museum in Las Vegas, in a place where visitors could witness the last thing those 7 victims saw before they died.